Bienvenidas, bienvenidos. Today we are in Mother Africa. We all know that our common Eve is from Africa, and so it is to our Mother Africa that we dedicate this video, and we're going to speak about the Sahel region and specifically Burkina Faso, the amazing things that are going on there. But first, this is Latina Literati. You have the continent of Africa, and you have North Africa. You have the whole Saharan belt, where the desert of the Sahara is kind of pushing up against the green zones above it and below it. But underneath that, or right in the middle of the thickest part of Africa, you have the Sahel region. And that's what we're going to focus on today, and specifically Burkina Faso. Now, Burkina Faso, as part of this whole region, is an ancient place. For hundreds of thousands of years, people have lived in these areas, especially, of course, where there's fresh water and salt. There's a direct correlation between human development and the existence of fresh water, salt, game, that sort of things. So you have many different people, the Fulani, the Bobo, and you have, for example, the Mossi. The Mossi kingdom is huge, very important in African history in the 11th century. So for hundreds of years, people gather, huge centers of learning. Many of the people accept Islam. So you have a real program for literacy, and you have schools, and they really are able to defend themselves and flourish until, of course, the French arrive. So by both different weapons and treachery, many of these countries fall under the French colonial rule, which really means extraction of resources. So Burkina Faso, quite interesting because its history, it's carved up. As you know, these areas were not respected by the colonial powers, and so the colonial powers just kind of carve countries and areas up as they see fit. So the original name of this area was Upper Volta because of the Volta River. And in the 1970s, when you have independence movements and you have countries coming into their own, many of them are changing their names. And Burkina Faso is a name that is chosen by the national hero Thomas Sankara. And Thomas Sankara renames the country Burkina Faso, which means the land of honest people, or the land of honest men. What a beautiful name for a country. So Burkina Faso then begins this trajectory of being under the foot of the French. Even though they have political freedom, the economic structure and the financial system are still absolutely French controlled. And what does that mean? That means that all of the African nations have to use an African French franc and deposit all of their gold into the French central bank. I'm not kidding. I mean, can you imagine? Not only do they have the indignities of all the things the colonial powers did, but you still have to give us all your gold, and we're going to give you these little pieces of paper that you can then trade for goods and services, and we're going to decide how much you get and what it's worth. So as you can tell, that's not a way to provide real help or development. And then you have these international organizations like the International Monetary Fund saying, we're going to lend you and corrupt leaders that we've put in your countries to supposedly build infrastructure projects, but at interest rates that you'll never be able to pay back. And by the way, you have to do away with all social services. Again, insanity. But that's how the international system keeps developing nations in absolute abject poverty and suffering. So what's happens? 1978, Thomas Sankara says, wait a minute, there is another road. So from 1983 to 1987, Thomas Sankara, surprise, surprise, is focusing on education, women's rights, social justice issues, access to resources for the poor, and he gets assassinated. Thomas Sankara will join the dozens of African leaders that were assassinated with the help of the Central Intelligence Agency, because who could want to have Africa independent and thriving? Not the CIA. Anyone who is seen as being able to unite the people and bring the people the resources of their own country is of course seen as someone who is a danger to the international interests of all of the colonizers, Europe, and of course the United States. So after Thomas Sankara's assassination, you can imagine there's turmoil in Burkina Faso. Thomas Sankara is assassinated as part of a coup by his close friend Blaise Compaoré. But the Burkinabe people still have the memory and all of the different initiatives that Sankara started still resonate with them. And so in 2014, there is an uprising, and it is inspired by the Arab Spring. Remember, we talked about where North Africa is and where the Sahel is, and Burkina Faso is right in the middle. And so the Arab Spring inspires the people to rise up and say, enough is enough. We want and we know that we can do better for our own people. So Compaoré is forced to flee, and there is a time of transition. There are different leaders, military leaders and all, but all of a sudden a young military officer comes to the forefront. Ibrahim Toare is a key figure in the reforms that the people are requesting in Burkina Faso. This is a man who comes from humble origins. As in many developing nations, the military is seen as a way of rising above humble origins, and so he goes through the military, becomes an officer, and eventually is chosen to lead the country. Now, this is a man who's only 36 years old. He's quite young, and he has a vision for Burkina Faso. He is looking at the political aspirations of his people, and he's looking at the social and economic needs of his people. As you can imagine, Burkina Faso is about 99% agricultural, rural. Most of the people live outside of the capital. And so what does the new leader do? He starts to invest in agricultural equipment, bringing in billions of dollars of agricultural equipment so that people can develop their land. They are growing rice, and they are growing wheat and sorghum and all sorts of staples, and all of a sudden they don't need to import food, because as we know, nutritional sovereignty is central to our families, to our communities, and to our political entities. So once you have nutritional sovereignty, you've got a pretty good basis. And so here are just a couple of projects that are just amazing that he's been able to accomplish. Largest pasta factory in Western Africa in joint venture with Qatar, amazing. So now the local farmers are selling the wheat not to far away foreign markets, not to even far away city markets, but to factories that are producing then finished products like pasta. In other areas, he is focusing on health. 55 hospitals have supposedly been inaugurated in Burkina Faso. That is unheard of in any country. And the amazing thing is, what he did, for example, is he took all the dust, huge mountains of what is left over in the mining process, and had people go through it again, and was able to find just bars and bars, equivalent of bars and bars of gold. Really interesting. So he's saying to the mining companies, you want to mine our gold, you need to give us gold for our central bank. And this is the most interesting thing. He's told France, we're done. We're not going to be under your economic or financial boot. We're going to have our own central bank, and we're going to have an application by which everyone in the country can make payments, can save, can have accounts, all of the transactions that you would do with banks, this application will allow you to do that. So what it's doing is taking something that only the very elite could do, go to a bank and set up an account, and give it to the whole country, so that the resources are going to be circulating within the different communities within Burkina Faso. Again, we've talked about this before. The number one thing we can do to fight authoritarianism and to fight fascism is ensure that resources stay in our communities. We don't want the megalith, large corporations to take their dollars and buy offices and buy the presidency. We want local shop owners, local service providers to be supported through our circulation of our resources. And that's exactly what he's done. Fascinating, fascinating. He has come to agreements with other countries. In fact, when the United States said, we're not going to give you any more aid because we don't think we should help anybody, you know what he said? We will give rice to Africa. Fascinating man. As you can imagine, he has already withstood and been able to survive many attempts on his life. And so we wish him well, and we hope that he is able to complete the many infrastructure projects he has, the roads, the bridges, the different communication projects that he has. And again, it's fascinating to see. He also, of course, is focusing on education. There is a whole area for women and development of women and businesses. So a lot is going on in Burkina Faso. And so when you think about the future of the world and the future economics and the demographics, because I think it's important to understand, or at least to think about, the demographics are our destiny. And what does that mean? That means that the future will be Africa and will be Asia and Latin America. Nigeria is expected to surpass China in population. Every African nation, and Burkina Faso is no different, has a very young population. So with all of the things that are going on, all the tragedies and the wars and disease and all that, you still have what is called the famous pyramid, right? The population pyramid, where you have mostly young people and less as you go up, as opposed to Europe and North America, where you have the inverted pyramid, where you have less young people and a lot more people that are older. So fascinating to watch Burkina Faso, to see the rise of this new leader, and the whole Sahel region is changing. I think it's the heart of Mother Africa, and we should be watching and cheering them on as they forge their own path to a better tomorrow for their people. And now on to my favorite part of the video, the book recommendations. And of course, all of the books recommended today are Africa inspired. As always, check your local library, your local bookseller. We want to support our local libraries and booksellers when we are looking to read new things, looking to read books. The first book is the Book of African Proverbs and Wise Sayings. And why is this a good book? Well, when you want to understand a culture, its sayings, the way that people express themselves, are absolutely central. And I'm going to give you an example. In Latin America, or at least in the countries where my family's from, every situation has a saying. Dime con quién andas y te diré quién eres. Tell me who your friends are and I will tell you who you are. El que no toma consejos no llega viejo. He who does not take advice will never grow old. Más sabe el diablo por viejo que por diablo. The devil knows more for being old than for being the devil. I could go on and on, but what I'm saying is that African sayings are also just beautiful, central to the African culture, and so highly recommend it. Just kind of fun to read these and to see that there are many common themes in traditional sayings around the world, and Africa has a lot of wisdom to share. The next book, it's called The Book of Water, Story of a Shaman. And I chose this book because, again, this is a real parallel between the magical realism of Latin America and the absolute belief in magic in Africa. And so I feel like these are real in our cultures, and I completely relate to them. I can't tell you that I've ever seen magic, but I feel like I've been in the presence of it. So I would just say fascinating book. I think it's really important to see how similar we are, the connections that all of our cultures have. And this is a good book to read if you enjoy this sort of thing. The final book is called So Distant from My Life, which really is a book about the reality of a lot of very bright young men. And so abducted by the Jesuits so that he can be trained, trying to find identity, understanding his place in the world, trying to migrate, just all sorts of themes that are really important and can help us understand the reality on the ground for so many young people in different parts of Africa. So thank you so much for joining us on this joint journey. We love to share the information and the book recommendations in these videos, and we would love to hear from you. What are you reading? What do you think about Mother Africa and the things that are going on there? As always, we would love you to subscribe to Latina Literati and let us know what you're reading, because we take book recommendations and we also take topic recommendations. If there's something you'd like us to discuss on these videos, we're happy to take a look at it and do some research. So as always, con mucho cariño, mucho salud, mucho amor. Gracias.